Here we go. Can everybody see this?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, I can't see you guys, so if you have anything to say, just butt in.
Yeah, it's good. That's good.
Okay. Well, if everybody's ready, then I will start in 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Today I will be talking about affective polarization among teens. So what is affective polarization? In the US, there is a two-party system comprised of the Democratic and Republican parties. US citizens tend to identify with one of the parties. And when people identify with the group, they divide the world into an in-group, in this case, their party, and an out-group, in this case, the opposing party. Social psychology literature demonstrates that partisans naturally feel positive feelings towards the in-group and negative feelings towards the out-group, and this is referred to as affective polarization. So to reiterate, affective polarization is essentially just dislike of the opposing partisans. So my research question was, to what extent does affective polarization exist among Democratic and Republican high school students in Baltimore County? So what is important to understand is that I was just focused on researching the phenomenon of affective polarization. It's a phenomenon, which means that there are causes and effects. However, I was just focused on evaluating the phenomenon itself. So my first foundational source was this by Schwab et al. And so researchers from Stanford surveyed 700 partisans on their views of the supporters of the opposing candidates in the 2016 presidential election. They found that supporters consistently assign negative stereotypes to opposing supporters while assigning positive stereotypes to fellow supporters. Further, 13.4% of Clinton supporters and 17.5% of Trump supporters categorized the average American who favored the opposing candidate as very or extremely evil. In addition, 16.2% of Clinton supporters and 15% of Trump supporters viewed supporters of the opposing candidate as very or extremely likely to commit acts of terrorism leading to the deaths of innocent people. This supports the notion of affective polarization, as voters favored their fellow supporters and thought poorly of opposing supporters purely on the basis of politics, to the point where they believed that they were capable of committing unspeakable acts. However, this study only studied affective polarization among adults and did not study among members of political parties, only among supporters of certain candidates. And it also only studied adults. So source 2, researchers from Pew Research Center conducted a study of over 9,000 participants, and they asked questions based on the views of partisans towards opposing partisans, and then just general questions about divisions in America. They found that partisans hold negative views and stereotypes towards opposing partisans, and the researchers had also conducted a very similar study in 2016, and they found that since 2016 the level of division and animosity towards opposing partisans has increased dramatically, finding that affective polarization exists to a great extent and is increasing. However, this study failed to assess affective polarization among teenagers and only gathered quantitative data, not gathering qualitative data. So this brings me to the gap which I filled with my research, which was studying teenagers, as teenagers are the next generation, studying in Baltimore County, which is an extremely partisan county, which would give a unique perspective on the issue, and then also gathering qualitative data to get a range of perspectives and a more nuanced view. So my hypothesis, based on what I had found with the foundational sources, was that affective polarization exists among students in Baltimore County to a great extent. So I took a mixed methods approach, and I used a survey and interviews. The survey provided quantitative and qualitative information, while the interviews provided qualitative information. So first, I evaluated the extent to which affective polarization existed through direct evaluation of prejudices, so directly evaluating the prejudices of the respondents. So secondly, I evaluated the opinions of partisans on the political landscape to provide just a general view of the extent of affective polarization in the world. So just asking them about how they viewed affective polarization just in general to get that more general view. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the survey was conducted online through Google Forms. The design of the survey was based on a survey conducted by the Pew Research Center, as I mentioned beforehand, even using several questions from it. First, students had to give consent to participate, and only after they gave consent and their parents gave consent were they asked further questions. So first they were asked which political party they identified with. The options were Republican, Democrat, Independent, and other. This was a slight limitation as not all students were registered with a party. However, resources were provided to help students decide which party they aligned with most, and then they were asked different questions depending on what they answered. So all participants were asked questions about divisions and just the general landscape of politics, as you can see here, and provided a chance to give a qualitative free response and elaborate on anything and any views they had on the situation. So, however, the difference was Republicans and Democrats were asked about their view of the opposing partisans to directly measure affective polarization. So then I conducted interviews, 2 with Democrats, 3 with Republicans, and this just helped to get that range of perspective and more nuanced evaluation. So some just quick limitations I had. The sample size was kind of small. It was pretty large, but a larger sample size could be used to ensure more accuracy. Also, there was some confusion over the definition of political party. Some people stated their opinions in terms of their opinions on supporters of certain candidates like Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Also, there's potential for lying, as this was kind of a touchy subject, just viewing prejudice of people, so people could have potentially lied. So moving on to results, I received 236 responses from over 13 Baltimore County public and private high schools, and then looking at the composition of surveyed participants on the left and the composition of voters in Baltimore County, it was very reflective of the composition of the county, which indicates that there was quite a bit of accuracy. A little over 50% were Democrat on both sides, about 25% were Republican, and then the additional 25% was comprised of independents and others. So this just shows that it was pretty reflective of the general populace, which just shows that there was quite a bit of accuracy. So, and then just moving into the findings, among the total participants surveyed, 96% said divisions between Republicans and Democrats are increasing, and likewise 82% of the total participants surveyed said that they are very or at least somewhat concerned about the divisions, including 45% who said that they were very concerned about the growing divide. So dislike of opposing partisans causes these divisions. Therefore, if divisions are increasing, affective polarization must be increasing. So this confirms the Pew Research study, which also found that divisions are increasing. So then in terms of feeling towards opposing partisans, both the Democrats and Republicans indicate that the opposing partisan makes them feel negative emotions such as afraid and angry and frustrated. A higher percentage of Democrats feel negatively about Republicans than Republicans who feel negatively about Democrats. A small portion of both sides exhibited positive emotions towards the other side, yet a higher percentage of Republicans felt positive emotions towards Democrats than Democrats who felt positively about Republicans. Overall, Democrats exhibited more negative feelings towards Republicans in every category than Republicans do, also showing a discrepancy between Democrats and Republicans in their affective polarization, while both are effectively polarized. So this confirms the Pew Research study, which found that partisans view opposing partisans negatively. So in terms of prejudices towards opposing partisans, both sides do hold negative prejudices, as we can see on this left column. This right column would be the positive prejudices. So Democrats are more likely than Republicans to think opposing partisans are immoral, corrupt, unintelligent, and closed-minded, while Republicans are more likely than Democrats to see opposing partisans as unpatriotic and lazy. So this confirms the Pew Research study, which also found that partisans hold prejudices. So in terms of values and goals, when asked if opposing partisans shared their values and goals, Republicans were much more likely to answer affirmatively than Democrats. Only 43% of Democrats answered that Republicans shared their values and goals, while 67% of Republicans answered that Democrats shared their values and goals. This just proves that Democrats are more polarized than Republicans and even see the opposing partisans as inferior morally, just further proving effective polarization. So then moving on to some of the qualitative data, one of the most significant trends that I found was actually in their willingness to be interviewed. In terms of interviews, 22% of Democrats answered on a survey that they were willing to be interviewed, stating positive phrases such as absolutely and I love these conversations. So in stark contrast, only 2% of Republicans or one Republican answered that they would like to be interviewed. When contacted to set up an interview, this Republican did not respond. So Republicans explained their lack of willingness, stating that they feared effective polarization from Democrats and that they fear ostracization and knew that they would be targeted. So this not only proves effective polarization, it also shows that Democrats are more effectively polarized to the point where their effective polarization scares Republicans. So then in terms of just general themes, there were negative stereotypes expressed on both sides. And then another thing which I really liked about this, as the qualitative data allowed for a more nuanced view, there was quite a spectrum of affective polarization. Of course, you had on one side people who completely renounced affective polarization, stating someone's political beliefs shouldn't affect how you view them. And then obviously you have on the other side of the affective polarization spectrum people who are extremely polarized, saying that they just strongly dislike the opposing side and see nothing positive about them. And then the majority of people fell somewhere in the middle, offering more of a nuanced evaluation and stating that while the other side had bad stereotypes, they were also still had redeeming qualities. And then the third was just another discrepancy in Democratic versus Republican affective polarization. Democrats were much more likely to break off connection with opposing partisans, while Republicans were much more likely to have had a Democrat break off the friendship based on political differences, showing Democrats are much more effectively polarized. So then returning back to my hypothesis, I have proven my hypothesis. The results confirm the Pew Research study, showing that affective polarization does exist among the population. Divisions are increasing, partisans hold prejudices and feel negatively towards opposing partisans, and partisans express that they are effectively polarized, therefore proving that affective polarization does exist among students in Baltimore County to a great extent. And also the affective polarization among Democrats was stronger than affective polarization among Republicans, just altering that. But so in terms of implications, in terms of research, more research could focus on causes and effects. This focused on phenomenon, while more research could focus on causes and effects. More research could be done to further the research on the extent of the issue, such as using different age groups, different areas, a more general surveying the populace of the United States. And then one of the things I found, again, was that the discrepancies between Democrats and Republicans, this could be further researched to provide a better reason as to why this occurs and if it occurs. So I did talk to my advisor about this topic to let you know, to ensure that my results were unbiased, and he affirmed that the data showed that Democrats were more effectively polarized, and therefore the conclusion that Democrats are more polarized is based in fact and is not implicated or created by bias. So then in terms of practical applications, teachers could take steps to reduce affective polarization by teaching teenagers to accept others regardless of their political beliefs. So this work has substantially added to the current body of literature, proving affective polarization does exist amongst teenagers and opening further areas of inquiry. Thank you. And then I just have citations.
Very nice.
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
Mr. Bowman's going to ask the first defense question, Courtney. Okay, here we go.
All right, great job, Courtney. I just wanted to ask here, how did you determine which results generated by your research method were most important in informing your new understanding? So you presented a ton of data here. Which ones did you think were most important then in informing your sort of new knowledge?
Yeah, so some of the results I found most important were obviously I was using the Pew study as a guide to my research in general, and some of the things they researched were divisions, prejudices, the feelings towards the opposing partisans. So I kind of just used that as a stepping off point to determine which of these results were most important. I really emphasized my use of those, and then just upon review of them, I graphed all of my data, and then I just found which ones showed significant differences. Significant differences could be from differences from the Pew study, could be between differences between Democrats and Republicans, as I showed like some of the values and goals questions showed some significant differences, and then just things that either refuted or directly confirmed or denied my hypothesis. So things that showed that prejudice does exist or prejudice doesn't exist. Of course, I didn't find anything that showed that prejudice didn't exist, or I would have included that. But so one of those was just like the prejudice statistics and all of those, but just things that like directly refuted or confirmed.
Thank you. Yep.
Okay. All right. So from the next batch, the middle zone of the world defense questions, what additional questions emerged during your research And based on your recent experience, what advice would you give other researchers who might choose to investigate those questions?
Absolutely. So this is quite an emerging field. There's been very little research done to it. Again, as I stated before, the only study that I could find that had directly measured affective polarization was the Pew Research study. So of course, more research could be done to determine the extent, because this was a very pioneering study in the fact that it directly measured the phenomenon rather than measuring causes and effects. A lot of research has been done to measure cause and effect. However, this study broke new ground by saying that affective polarization does exist among teenagers in Baltimore County. So since this is a completely different age group that has never been determined, more research could be done to directly evaluate the causes and effects of affective polarization, and specifically this age group, this specific gap of research. And then also another thing would be why there were so many discrepancies between affective polarization with Democrats and Republicans. Again, I did go to outside sources to make sure that this was not based in bias, this was based in fact. And what I found is that Democrats are consistently more effectively polarized. We've seen this with the values and goals discrepancies, with the differences in prejudices, differences in feelings towards opposing partisans, but just why this exists, if it exists in other areas, if this is because of the very blue area that we are in. And then one of the most impactful things I found when doing my research, which really aided in my research, was that using qualitative data was quite good in further informing my conclusions. No study before has ever used qualitative data to further their perspective and further their conclusions, and I found that that was really a good tool in furthering their knowledge of the questions and answering and getting to those conclusions. So that would be the research or advice that I would give to other researchers.
All right, and then lastly, what unanticipated turn did you encounter as your research progressed? What were the reasons for this change in direction, and how did you then modify your method or approach?
Yes, so one method that, or one anticipated turn that I kind of faced was that despite the anonymity of my methods, I felt that students might be kind of inclined to lie about this topic, which could have changed my results. So therefore, what I did to mitigate this potential problem of not getting the full story about everything was that I expanded my research to include several routes to accurately assess affective polarization. So firstly, I directly evaluated their prejudices by directly asking Democrats and Republicans what they felt about the other side. However, I also employed several other methods to further inform my knowledge. So the second method would be evaluating the effects of antipathy, which was divisions between parties politically and socially. So what I did with this is, if you remember the slide on divisions between partisans, and I think it was about 96% said that divisions are increasing. They were just asked about this, and then by measuring these effects, I could extrapolate the causes, which was affective polarization, and this is a method pioneered by the Pew study. So I used this technique from other researchers. So therefore I was able to see that not only were there direct prejudices, but there was also just general affective polarization in the political arena, which mitigated that outcome of having potential for lying about prejudices and being able to see everything. And then with this, I asked independents and others, and as well as Democrats and others, Democrats and Republicans, just to fully get that view of political and affective polarization, just because Democrats and Republicans are directly involved in it, but just also getting that secondary, more objective view of the current situation. So this goal of accuracy to mitigate the effects of potential lying on my outcomes just helped me to explore further routes to improve my evaluation. So just to reiterate, direct evaluation and then indirect evaluation. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. Right, let me stop our timer. Your timing is impeccable.